All know about this 1997 series called King of the Hill. It's currently still airing on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block, but I encountered something dark and sinister with this series sometime in late 2007. I was in a Goodwill store buying some Nintendo 64 games, because that store normally had a good stock of retro games. However, I strolled over to the VHS section in the back, just then remembering that I owned a VCR still. One of the first things I saw was the Titanic VHS tapes, the one that came in two tapes, but it was in one dust cover. I thought it would be a good movie for me and my wife, as she had never seen this movie before. To ensure that the tapes would be functional, I took one of the tapes out of the dual VHS dust cover, only to see something unexpected. It was a VHS tape with a crooked sticker on it. Written in Sharpie was KOTH S1 E1 NR. I inspected the other tape and it said KOTH S1 E1 NR P2. I assumed it was part 2. I didn't know why one 22 to 23 minute episode took two VHS tapes. But I was curious. I bought the two tapes for $2.22. When I got home, nobody was there but me. Therefore, I had to take up the painstaking process of uncoiling the stiff coax cables and the bulky VCR. I soon tuned the TV to channel 3 and began viewing King of the Hill Season 1, Episode 1, not rated. It had the regular opening of the first episode of King of the Hill, but without the music. It was just a silent camera panning over the city of Arlen. It began normally after that, with Bobby at the baseball game and Hank yelling at him as always. As we all know, Bobby didn't succeed. This is where everything starts to get weird. On the ride home, Hank, Peggy, and Bobby were silent, and this went on for about maybe 3 minutes. No one was angry. No one had any expression at all. Abruptly, as the family pulls into the driveway, it cut to a scene inside the house. Hank was yelling at Bobby for not giving 110%. Hank then picked up the baseball and got into a throwing position. At this point, the video quality was getting really scraggly, and the volume level was raised roughly 10%. Hank pegged the ball and hit him in the nose. Peggy was seen in the background crying, and Hank simply told her, "Shut the hell up!" Bobby immediately cupped his nose and ran out of the room crying the whole way. As Bobby was in the bathroom checking his nose, a social worker came to the door. Peggy greeted him as Hank sat on the sofa, relaxing as if nothing happened. From this point, the colors began to look more like the real episode. The scene with Hank telling the social worker off played as it did in the real episode. Suddenly, the scene from the originally aired episode cut to another scene, which was not from this real episode. It was a scene with more ragged video, yet the audio remained the same. The scene depicted Peggy sitting on the phone late at night, most likely contacting CPS to tell them about how Hank purposely threw the baseball at Bobby. Hank suddenly walked through the doorway. He was in a bathrobe and had no glasses, and he grabbed the phone. "Who the hell is this?" Hank yelled. "This is the Department of Child Services," was the response. Hank's face quickly turned red and slammed the phone back on the wall. He grasped Peggy by the neck. "You're gonna get more of those twig boys over here to put me in prison and take my boy away?" he howled. The scene cut to Hank taking Peggy by the back of the neck down the hallway to the backyard. Hank took a propane tank off the grill. He shoved the valve into Peggy's mouth. The video then went silent for a minute, simply showing the propane valve in Peggy's mouth. When the scene started moving again, Peggy's eyes slowly closed, and a voice was heard. "Buck Strickland, forgive me for using propane for this." The only problem was that when Hank said this, Hank did not even sound like Mike Judge, the creator of the show who voiced him. It sounded like an older and deeper voice. The screen went black after this. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the tape to make sure there was no more content on it. There was none. I just thought to myself, why so much wasted space? And and at this point I was really shaken up. I went to go grab a coffee. When I got back, I popped in the second tape. It was just a black screen. I fast forwarded to check for content and eventually came across some stuff that was really starting to scare me. It was a funeral, but there was very few colors. There was only various forms of gray and black, and the colors of people's faces. It just didn't seem like a real King of the Hill episode. The funeral was for Peggy. Attending it was all of the Hill's neighbors, including some acquaintances such as Cotton and John Redcorn. Even Hank was there, claiming that Peggy had committed suicide. As Peggy's coffin was lowered into the hole, it faded into an overhead view of it being lowered down. This part really scared the shit out of me. It was a somewhat highly realistic image of Peggy in the coffin. The reason I say somewhat is because it looked so real, but still appeared to be drawn, and not a real person. It was just a realistic cartoon. The scene then cut to Bobby, Hank, and Ladybird sitting on a porch. Bobby had a queasy face, and Hank had one hand on the propane tank that he used to commit this murder. Bobby turned to his dad. "Why did you do it, Dad?" he asked in a humble voice. "I don't know, son," Hank responded. He almost sounded like he was crying. He then stood up and walked inside, leaving Bobby and Ladybird on the porch. It once again cut to a very dull scene, with nothing but black, gray, and the skin colors. It was a scene that literally made me sick to my stomach. It was Hank hanging from the ceiling, with a note pinned down on him. It's just stayed focused on him, swinging back and forth for 2 minutes, or longer. It then cut to the ending credits with the normal outro and theme music. I was actually kind of laughing on the inside at the fact that this show was playing the regular ending credits. After all that stuff happened, I was really more confused and creeped out at it. I went onto some forums but found nothing about this episode. However, I came across someone on Yahoo Answers who had a similar occurrence as me. They received a similar tape at a thrift shop in Johns Creek County in North Georgia, a place about 20 miles from where I got mine. I managed to get on AIM with this person, but I didn't get any answers. I was really curious at this point, so I drove about 40 miles and went right down to the Cartoon Network Turner Broadcasting headquarters. I knew that Fox Broadcasting made the show, but I assumed Cartoon Network had every episode on record, as they aired them all. Beforehand, I did some research and figured out who was in charge of broadcasting King of the Hill, so I found a receptionist in the studio and demanded to talk to them. Apparently, though, I needed a guest pass of some sort. I was completely pissed at this point, so I drove back home and put on my old sheriff's uniform. I was a sheriff for Johns Creek County about 3 years ago. I went back, and although it is unlawful, I used my badge to talk to him. When I got into his office, he was just sitting at his desk talking on the phone. I walked up to him, threw the tapes on the desk, and demanded answers. He dropped the phone immediately and grabbed the tapes. I followed him to another office on the other side of the building. There was a small safe in this office. He opened it up, put the tapes in, and locked it. He then told me to leave. I did not want to act like a sheriff anymore because I did not want to get in trouble with the law, so I left. I got home and flipped on the TV. Adult Swim was on, and I was relieved to see a real episode of King of the Hill. Whew. To this day, there are only 2 copies of this episode on 4 tapes that I can find of anything about on the internet. One of them I assume is still locked up in the Cartoon Network studios. It may be possible for you to come across more of them in thrift shops throughout the entire Southeast.